Poor girl was evicted. A lonely and cold millionaire CEO made an offer and, "You can't sleep here, miss." The guard's curt voice cut through the silence of the dimly lit hallway. Kate slowly looked up. She was sitting on the hospital lobby couch, wrapped in the only coat she owned, pretending to wait for someone who was never going to show up. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, and the feeling of being nowhere was almost unbearable. "I'm just waiting for my ride," she lied, her voice catching in her throat. The security guard, a grey-haired man with a tired expression, didn't respond. He simply walked past as if he didn't want to see. And in truth, he didn't. Because this was her second night sleeping there, hidden, pretending she had somewhere to be while the world outside crumbled beneath her feet. 2 days earlier, Kate had been evicted. After losing her aunt, her only living relative, she had been left alone in a tiny rented room in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Newark. Working as a janitor in a private hospital, she tried to hold on to double shifts to pay her overdue rent, but life seemed determined to push her further away from what little she had left. The woman who had taken over the boarding house after her aunt's death had been blunt. "You have until today. There's a waiting list for this room. I can't let you stay here out of pity," she said, dropping a cardboard box with Kate's few belongings at the door. Kate tried to argue, but the words wouldn't come. A mix of humiliation and exhaustion left her frozen. That night, she ended up sleeping against the laundry room wall, clutching her aunt's Bible and a cracked picture frame of the two of them. Now she was at the hospital again, wearing the same worn-out shoes, hoping no one would notice her. By 5:30 a.m., Sanshi was already on her feet, cleaning the bathrooms on the 3rd floor as if it were any other day. Her uniform was clean, though wrinkled, and she had washed her face in the staff restroom. It was Friday. If she could make it through one more night at the hospital, maybe she'd find a solution by Saturday. She considered calling Carla, her only friend, but Carla's father didn't allow visitors. She also thought about going to Trenton, where a distant cousin lived, but the money for the bus fare was all she had left for the month. In the shade of a tree behind the parking lot, she ate a dry sandwich and an apple for lunch. Then she went back to work. She was cleaning the reception windows when she saw him. Brian. He was standing at the hospital entrance, his back to her, staring at the street as if waiting for something that would never come. His presence always brought a sudden hush among the staff. Tall, with a rigid posture and firm steps. He always wore the same kind of dark suit and carried the same unreadable expression. Rumors said he was a millionaire. Others said he'd lost someone and now lived in isolation. Few had the courage to approach him. At that moment, Brian turned slightly, and his eyes met Kate's. It was brief, direct, but without judgment. She quickly looked away and kept cleaning. That night, after everyone had left, Kate waited. She returned to the reception area and quietly sat in the corner, just like the day before. The security guard pretended not to see her. The hospital had become her only shelter, and she was determined to do everything right to avoid being noticed. On Saturday, before the sun came up, she was already sweeping the main hallway. It wasn't her shift, but she wanted to show she was useful. Maybe if she showed willingness, the administration would let her stay a bit longer. She was bending down to pick up a piece of paper when she heard the footsteps. Brian. He walked into the hallway without a word. He paused for a few seconds, watching her. She lowered her gaze, expecting a comment or a reprimand, but he just walked on. At the end of the day, while organizing the cleaning supplies, she was called to the administration office. "Kate," said the manager, wearing a grey suit, his tone formal, "we've been informed that you're sleeping on hospital premises." Her blood ran cold. The floor seemed to fall away beneath her feet. It was just 2 days. I swear, I just needed some time to figure things out." He sighed, crossing his arms. "Dr. Brian has asked to speak with you." Kate's eyes widened. The director?" "Yes, upstairs. Now." Not knowing whether she was walking or floating, she made her way to the elevator. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded in her throat. She never imagined that man even knew her name. She knocked on the door. A dry voice answered, "Come in." The office was spacious, with tall windows, dark furniture, and a large bookshelf full of technical books. Brian stood near the desk. She hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to step further in. "Are you without housing?" he asked bluntly, without hesitation. She hesitated, then nodded. "Do you plan to keep sleeping here?" "No, I just needed 2 days. I'm already working on a solution." He walked over to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. "You're a discreet employee, and according to reports you do good work. I have a proposal." Kate furrowed her brow. "What kind of proposal?" "I need to be legally married for 1 year. It's a requirement for a family matter. This won't be a relationship but a contract. You'll have housing, food, a monthly salary, health insurance, and at the end of the term, an additional payment." Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "A marriage?" "No personal obligations, just cohabitation and presence at a few events. We'll live under the same roof. No emotional involvement." "But why me?" "Because you're discreet, single, with no attachments. And from what I can tell, you're not the type to get emotionally involved. I need someone trustworthy." Kate felt her knees go weak. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. You have until Monday. If you accept, pack your things. A car will pick you up at 8 a.m. If not, we'll carry on as if this conversation never happened." He handed her the envelope. "Read it carefully. Only sign the last page if you agree." She took the envelope without saying a word, walked down to the reception area, and exited the hospital through the back door. She sat on a bench at the small park across the street. Her hands shook. Inside the envelope was a detailed contract. Clauses, conditions, payments, dates, all legal, terrifyingly real. That night, she stayed at the home of a former patient, Mrs. Zuleida, who offered her hot soup and a blanket. She didn't tell the truth. She simply said she was choosing a path. On Sunday night, already lying on a makeshift mattress, Kate opened her aunt's Bible and asked for a sign. The verse that appeared spoke of unexpected roads and doors opening where one least expects. On Monday morning, at exactly 8 a.m., she stood on the sidewalk outside the old boarding house with a single suitcase in hand and the signed envelope. The black car arrived right on time. Kate got in, her heart racing and only one certainty in mind. She didn't know if she was heading toward shelter or another free fall. The black car door opened with a soft hydraulic click, and Kate hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping onto the cobblestone sidewalk. The driver, a man with a stern face and dark sunglasses, didn't say a word as he took the suitcase from the trunk and placed it in front of her. The Monday sky was covered in grey clouds, making the air feel even colder. The front of the house rose like a frame from another world, an imposing structure with tall columns, windows that looked more like stained glass from an old library, and a garden trimmed with mathematical precision. Everything there was far too beautiful, and yet utterly soulless. The mansion door opened before she could even climb the first steps. "Welcome. I'm Martha, the house manager. The doctor is in his office. I'll show you to your room," said the woman with a tight bun and modest clothing. Kate nodded silently, gripping the handle of her suitcase. She stepped inside with small, cautious movements, her eyes trying to take it all in at once. The hall was spacious, decorated in neutral tones. On the walls hung paintings of cold landscapes and portraits of serious-faced people. There was a spiral staircase at the back and closed doors everywhere, as if the house hid secrets behind every corner. No sound echoed through the space, except the ticking of a clock hanging high on the main wall. They climbed to the upper hallway, where 3 doors lined the narrow corridor. "This will be your room," Martha said, opening the door in the middle. It was simple but clean. A single iron-framed bed, an old dresser, heavy beige curtains, and a window with a side view of the garden. There was also a nightstand with a small Bible, apparently left behind by a previous guest, and a bookmark from a local evangelical church. Linens are in the closet. The bathroom is en suite. Meals are served downstairs at 8 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 7 p.m. The doctor rarely has dinner, but the schedule is maintained. Any questions? "None, thank you." Martha nodded, closed the door, and disappeared down the silent hallway. Kate let go of the suitcase handle and sat on the edge of the bed, a lump forming in her throat. As luxurious as the house was, there was nothing warm about it. Everything seemed too clean, too organized, too distant. The rest of the day passed in silence. Martha showed her the allowed areas, the laundry room in the back, the pantry, the courtyard where the staff took their breaks. The household team was minimal. There was only the gardener, an elderly man named Jack, and Diane, a young woman who came only on weekends to handle deep cleaning. The whole environment felt governed by invisible rules that everyone knew, but no one dared to speak aloud. By late afternoon, the sound of the front door opening shattered the silence like an explosion. Kate descended the stairs slowly. Brian had arrived. He was taking off his blazer and handing a black folder to Martha, who received it with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred objects. When he saw Kate, he gave a small nod. "Is the room in order?" "Yes, doctor. Thank you very much. Tomorrow morning we'll go to the notary office. We'll sign the papers. Tonight, rest. The contract is already with the lawyer. You'll receive a copy after registration." That was it. No additional kindness. No smile. Kate nodded and returned to her room. She was too exhausted for more questions. The next morning she woke up before 6. She put on a simple dress, tied her hair back, and went down for breakfast. Martha was setting an elegant table with sliced fruit, toast, boiled eggs, and orange juice. Brian was already waiting outside, leaning against a different car, this time a black sedan with tinted windows and a suited driver. The ride to the notary office was silent. When they arrived, everything was already prepared. 2 hired witnesses were present, and a clerk awaited them with the documents laid out. The ceremony was efficient. They signed a civil union contract valid for 12 months, with specific clauses on cohabitation, confidentiality, and termination. No emotion, no symbolic gesture. The clerk wished the couple well. Brian simply nodded in acknowledgement and left without looking at Kate. On the way back, she took a deep breath and decided to break the silence. "And your nephew? Is he already in the country?" "He's arriving next month. He's temporarily with his maternal grandmother, but I'll have full custody. My father's will stipulated that I could only obtain it if I were legally married." He didn't look at her as he spoke. "That's why the contract exists," he concluded. "I understand. You'll be introduced as my wife on some occasions, but there are no personal expectations involved." Kate clasped her hands in her lap. Even though she had read and accepted every clause, hearing it out loud made everything feel even more mechanical, empty. The following days passed slowly. Brian left early and came home late. Silence became as much a part of the house as the furniture. Kate tried to stay busy. She read books from the small local library, helped Martha organize the pantry, walked through the garden at times when she wouldn't cross paths with anyone. For the first time in a long while, she had a safe roof over her head, and yet she felt like a visitor in her own skin. At night, she wrote in her journal. On the first page, she recorded, "Day 1. I'm in a place far too beautiful for someone like me. But maybe if I stay quiet, no one will notice I don't belong." And just like that, the contract was officially in effect. On paper, they were husband and wife. But inside the house, they lived like strangers who had signed a silent pact not to touch, neither with gestures nor with words. The sound of rain tapping against the window woke Kate before the alarm could go off. It was still dark, but the first streaks of morning light were already casting shadows on the bedroom walls. She sat up in bed and spent a few moments just listening to the wind, as if it too was trying to wake up slowly. She put on the sweatshirt she had bought with the first payment from the contract and headed downstairs to the kitchen. Martha was already there, arranging the dishes with her usual precision. The clock on the wall read 6:45 a.m. As agreed, breakfast was served at exactly 7 every day, even if no one showed up. Kate took a sip of tea and kept herself busy folding the cloth napkins. Brian didn't show up often, but sometimes he would appear without warning. When he did, just a single glance from him was enough to fill the room with tension. She still felt like a misfit, someone trying to occupy a space that wasn't hers. There were no smiles in the house, no spontaneous exchanges. Everything ran on punctuality and silence. It was like living inside an old clock. Beautiful, elegant, but too rigid to hold any feeling. And yet, there was safety there. For the first time since she lost her aunt, Kate slept peacefully. She no longer had to curl up in hallways, pretend she was waiting for someone, or make pillows out of old clothes. There was a clean bed, a solid roof, and hot water in the shower. Small luxuries that, to her, felt like miracles. That's how she started building her own routine within the old routine of the house. She woke up before sunrise, said silent prayers with the Bible she inherited from her aunt, and wrote in the journal Brian had arranged to be left in her room, along with the initial paperwork. Writing became her outlet, the only way to put into words everything she couldn't say out loud. Each filled page became a reflection of the quiet life she was living. She described the smell of the living room at dusk, the sound of Martha's footsteps through the hallways, the splash of water in the laundry sink, and most of all, Brian's movements. He was a man of fixed habits, always drank the same tea before bed, read the same newspapers left on the library table each morning, kept all the house clocks 5 minutes fast, and never wore cologne. Even without speaking to him, Kate was learning who he was through his gestures. The forced cohabitation, though cold, created a kind of quiet intimacy. It was on a Friday evening while she was hanging sheets on the backyard clothesline that she heard footsteps again. She was distracted, adjusting the clothespins, when she saw Brian approaching with an envelope in his hands. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and looked more tired than usual. "Martha asked me to give you this. Health insurance documents. You need to sign them. It includes appointments, tests, and dental care," he said, handing her the envelope without ceremony. Kate wiped her hands on the hem of her sweatshirt and took it. "Thank you. Can I ask you something?" He nodded, waiting. "Why exactly 1 year?" Brian was silent for a few seconds, looking beyond the garden as if searching for an answer that would be easier to give to the wind than to a person. "It's the time required to meet the will's condition. After that, there's no legal obligation. And also, because 12 months is long enough for any cohabitation to wear out what's merely formal." Kate bit her lip. She wanted to say that maybe it was also enough time to build something, but she remained quiet. The contract was clear, and Brian made it even more so with every word he spoke. That night she went to bed early. She opened the envelope, reread every clause, and signed the papers. Then she sat on the bed with the journal on her lap and wrote, "I'm living in a place that feels too beautiful for me, but maybe I'm here to learn what true beauty is. Maybe silence teaches too." On Saturday, after finishing her morning chores, she found a small wooden box on the hallway shelf. It was hidden between 2 dark-covered books. It had floral carvings and looked old. When she opened it, she found a collection of handwritten notes, prayers, wishes, words of faith, all dated between 5 and 10 years ago, but one in particular caught her attention. "For my son Brian, may his heart find peace. Odette." It was the trembling handwriting of an elderly woman. Maybe it was his mother. Kate gently closed the box and put it back in the same spot. She didn't mention it to anyone, but in that moment she understood something deep. Someone had once prayed for that man. Someone believed that despite the coldness, the silence, and the distance, he could still be touched by peace. Later, she wrote in the journal, "Someone planted a seed here. Maybe I'm just the rain that comes after." In the days that followed, Brian remained mostly absent, but something subtle began to shift. He started appearing more often at breakfast, eating in silence, but eating. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. And on one of those mornings, after drinking the tea Kate had served, he quietly asked, "Does the tea have cinnamon?" "It does. I learned it's good for the stomach." He made a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "It's pleasant." In Brian's world, that was a warm compliment. The following Monday, Kate decided to go downtown to buy fabrics. It was something she used to do with her aunt. Embroidery, a forgotten hobby from the hard times, but one that was starting to make sense again. With a small portion of the money she received monthly, she bought thread, needles, and simple cloths. She began embroidering birds, flowers, and Bible verses that had marked her journey. She stitched in the afternoons, sitting near the hallway window, where the light was strongest. Martha, curious, commented one day, "You have steady hands. My grandmother used to say that those who embroider with love are stitching stories." Kate smiled. "Maybe I'm trying to stitch mine." On one of the towels, she discreetly embroidered the name Odette in honor of the woman who had written the prayers in the little box. She didn't tell anyone. She folded the fabric and left it on the entryway sideboard. 2 days later, the towel was gone. In its place was a bookmark with a Latin phrase and a dried flower pressed in clear plastic. Kate understood and smiled. The once cold and mechanical cohabitation was beginning to take on new colors. There were no touches, no confessions, but there was presence. Small, subtle, quiet, but real. And sometimes that was enough to begin transforming everything. The cold morning wind cut through the fabric of her sweatshirt, but Kate didn't seem to feel it. Sitting on the stone bench in the side garden, she watched the pale sky and the tall trees surrounding the property. In her hands, her aunt's Bible lay open, marked with colorful tabs and dog-eared pages made over the years. It was there, among those pages filled with notes and underlines, that she sought balance for the quiet new life she now led. Even after a few weeks in the house, Kate still didn't feel like she belonged. It was as if she were a character inserted into a carefully staged setting. Everything looked beautiful, everything worked, but it was devoid of any real affection. There were no hugs, no laughter, no spontaneous conversations. Brian remained the same methodical, quiet man. Martha, though polite, stayed strictly within the limits of her responsibilities. The other staff members appeared and disappeared like parts of some invisible clock. The house functioned, but without a soul, and it was in that emptiness that Kate's faith found a new purpose. Every morning before breakfast, she would read a Bible verse, say a prayer, and write in her journal. It was a simple ritual, almost secret, but it kept her grounded. Starting over, even in a place of luxury, took courage. And faith was the only space where she could be completely herself. It was during one of those mornings that she remembered an old habit, embroidering verses and names. Sitting near the hallway window, with freshly purchased fabric and the small wooden hoop in her lap, she began stitching small birds beside words that represented her hope, grace, trust, refuge. Each patient stitch was a silent conversation with the past and a quiet attempt to build a future. On the third cloth, she embroidered something different, the name Odette discreetly in the lower right corner. It was a silent tribute to the woman from the prayer box, the one who, years before, had written a request for peace for her son. That had deeply moved Kate, not just because of the faith it carried, but because someone at some point believed that Brian's heart could still change. She didn't tell anyone about the embroidery. She folded the cloth carefully and left it on the entryway console table, like someone slipping a letter into a bottle and tossing it into the sea. She didn't expect an answer. 2 days later, as she passed by the same table, she noticed the cloth was gone. In its place was a bookmark with a Latin phrase printed over a transparent background and a pressed dried flower inside. She couldn't translate the phrase, but she knew it was a response. She tucked the bookmark into the pages of the Bible, between verses about comfort and hope, and that night she wrote in her journal, "Faith moves through walls. It reaches even the places where silence feels eternal. Someone once prayed for him. Maybe I was placed here just to remind him that peace is possible." Brian, for his part, kept to his routines. He left early, came back late, rarely had dinner at home, but something subtle was beginning to shift. He was spending more time at the breakfast table. He didn't say much, but he listened. Occasionally, he would comment on the tea, the weather, or the news, and one morning, as Kate served tea with a cinnamon stick, he said, "This smell reminds me of something my mother used to make." She looked up, surprised by the almost nostalgic tone in his voice. "Cinnamon tea. She said it helped soothe the stomach," he added. Brian nodded, picked up the cup and took a sip. It was the first time he had mentioned someone from his family, and Kate knew in that instant that she was witnessing a crack in the wall. In the days that followed, She kept embroidering. The cloths began to pile up in a drawer, and she started stitching for herself as well. Handkerchiefs, dish towels, small scraps of fabric with phrases only she would understand. It was her way of anchoring herself in that space where, despite everything, she felt alive. It was Martha who noticed first. "These embroideries, you make them like someone writing a diary, don't you?" Kate smiled. "Yeah, I think so. Every stitch is a memory, a prayer, or a piece of me trying to keep going. My grandmother used to say that when you embroider with love, you stitch stories. Maybe you're stitching your own home piece by piece." The phrase echoed in Kate's mind for the rest of the day. Stitching a home. That was exactly what she was trying to do, not with walls, furniture, or a contract, but with invisible acts of care. The following week, a small storm rolled through the city. The power went out in the middle of the night. Kate was sitting in the hallway, reading one of the library books by the dim light of a flashlight, when she heard footsteps approaching. It was Brian, holding a candle, his expression unreadable. "There are more candles in the kitchen if you want to help light them." She stood up and followed him downstairs. She lit a few candles on the living room furniture, spread others throughout the halls and windows. The warm yellow glow changed the whole atmosphere of the house. The silence felt more intimate. The shadows moved gently. For the first time, the place felt lived in. Without saying much, they sat in the living room. Kate stitched by candlelight while Brian read a folded newspaper. For a few minutes, they simply sat there, sharing the silence naturally. Then he spoke, as if continuing a conversation that had started long ago. "My brother's name was Andrew. He died in an accident 2 years ago. Left behind a son." Kate didn't respond. She kept stitching, but her eyes lifted slightly. "That's why we're married. The boy's arriving soon. His mother died during childbirth. His maternal grandmother couldn't keep him. My father, before he passed, stated in his will that I could only get custody if I was legally married." She nodded gently. That explained the contract, but it also explained Brian's rigidity, his calculated way of living. He was someone who had lost, and who, instead of seeking comfort, took refuge in control. "That must have been hard," she said softly. "It was," he replied without hesitation. "Still is." The conversation ended there, but something in the house had shifted. Kate felt it. Brian did too. It was as if the candlelight had illuminated not just the rooms, but a part of them that had remained hidden for too long. That night, she wrote in her journal, "When the lights went out, the truth came in. I don't know what's next, but today, he let me in a little." The next morning, she found a new set of embroidery threads on the breakfast table. No note, no explanation. Just the gift, just the gesture. And Kate understood. It was like a prayer answered, only this time without words. On Sunday morning, the silence of the house was broken by something unusual, the clinking of dishes and the smell of warm bread. Kate was in the kitchen, carefully arranging slices into a linen-lined basket. She had woken up early as usual, but this time with a different purpose. The night before, Martha had called from the hospital to say she'd need to stay for at least 2 days under observation after a spike in her blood pressure. The housekeeper, always so firm and composed, seemed to have finally been overcome by exhaustion. When she hung up the phone, Kate took a deep breath, looked around, and knew she'd have to step in. She prepared a simple breakfast, but with care. Sliced fruit, buttered bread, scrambled eggs, tea and coffee. She placed everything on the table with a reverence that made the gesture feel sacred. The house, so accustomed to the chill of routine, now radiated a new kind of warmth. Subtle, but real. At 9 o'clock, Brian's steady footsteps echoed from the upstairs hallway. He came down the stairs in his usual long-sleeved white shirt and dress pants, as if heading to work, even on a Sunday. He stopped when he reached the dining room and looked at the table, surprised. "Is Martha not here?" he asked, not approaching just yet. "She's at the hospital," Kate replied calmly. "She had a blood pressure episode. She'll be under observation until tomorrow." Brian nodded, then took a few steps and sat at the head of the table. "And this? I thought maybe you'd want some breakfast. It's the least I could do." He picked up a cup and poured himself some tea. Kate sat at the opposite end of the table. For a few minutes they ate in silence, sharing the space with a kind of ease that felt old, familiar. But there was something different about that moment. Maybe the scent of cinnamon tea. Maybe Martha's absence, which always filled the house with her implicit order. Or maybe the simple fact that for once they were truly alone. "You cook?" he asked between bites. "The basics. I learned from my aunt. She used to bake homemade bread every Saturday. The whole neighborhood would stop by for it," she answered, smiling at the memory. "What else did she do?" "She sewed, a lot. She was devoted to St. Francis. She used to say, 'Those who don't serve, don't deserve to live.'" Brian let out a faint sound, a soft, restrained chuckle that might have gone unnoticed if Kate hadn't been paying such close attention. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a glimpse of something opening, an acknowledgement. That morning passed like a warm breeze in the middle of a long winter that had marked their relationship. When breakfast was over, Brian thanked her, not with words, but with a long glance and a slight nod. Yet for Kate, it said more than any phrase could. After he went back upstairs, she cleared the table with slow, quiet movements, as if trying to preserve what had just taken place. She put away each dish like someone storing a treasured memory. Later, while organizing the hallway bookshelf, a task she often used to quiet her thoughts, she came across the small wooden box again. She already knew what was inside: old notes, prayers written with conviction. Still, something compelled her to open it one more time. She leafed through the yellowed papers until she found the note with the shaky handwriting again. "For my son Brian, that his heart may find peace. Odette." Kate took a deep breath and stood there for a long while, staring at those words as if they were the house's hidden axis, as if that long-ago plea still echoed through the halls, quietly, waiting to be heard. She closed the box carefully, returned it to its place, and went back to her room. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, she wrote in her journal, "Someone once had enough faith for him. Maybe my role here isn't to understand, but to continue, to water the seed she planted." By Monday, Martha had not yet returned. Kate took over the main tasks. She helped Jack in the garden, organized the pantry, and supervised the cleaning Diane did. Everyone seemed grateful, though no one said it aloud. Brian spent most of the day out, as usual. It wasn't until late afternoon, on her way back from the city library with some new fabrics, that Kate had an idea. With what was left of her monthly allowance from the contract, she had bought more thread and needles. She decided to use part of the fabric to embroider something special. Not just names or verses, but something meaningful. A piece to hang by the entrance, maybe a table runner or a small wall panel. Over the next few nights, she stitched carefully. She embroidered olive branches, tiny birds, and in the center wrote quietly, "Home isn't a place. It's the care someone gives." Martha returned 2 days later, visibly more fragile. Kate welcomed her with hot tea and a folded blanket on the couch. "Thank you for holding everything together," the housekeeper said in a rare, sincere tone. "I did what I could. Just took care of the basics," Kate replied humbly. Martha nodded, but the look she gave Kate said more: recognition. In the days that followed, the house felt lighter. Brian still kept his strict schedule, but his presence began to soften. Sometimes he would appear in the living room while Kate was embroidering. He wouldn't say anything, just sit with a book or a newspaper. One night he asked, "Why embroidery? What does it mean to you?" Kate paused her stitching and thought for a moment before answering. "It's like writing, only with thread. Every stitch is a thought. A way to remind myself I can still create something beautiful, even in silence." He nodded slowly as if he understood. "My mother did that too. She made quilts. One had all the names of her kids, her grandkids. When she passed, I kept them all. They're in the attic." Kate felt a tug in her chest, a direct mention of his mother, another brick in Brian's wall being removed. "She also prayed for you," she said gently. Brian looked at her, surprised. "How do you know?" "I found a box with notes. One of them asked for peace for your heart, signed by Odette. He didn't answer. He just lowered his eyes and took a deep breath. That night, neither of them said anything else. But when Kate returned to her room, she found an envelope on the dresser with a single handwritten sentence. What's done with faith endures, even when time tries to erase it. Inside, there was a bookmark, the same kind of quiet gift she had received before. She placed it between the pages of her journal, next to her own words. What had once been a relationship built solely on contract and silence was now shifting. Small gestures, subtle exchanges, glances that no longer avoided each other. There were no touches, no declarations, but there was presence. And sometimes that was enough to turn cold coexistence into something that began to warm. Slowly, with time, with care, with faith. The light drizzle falling that morning wasn't enough to stop Kate from waiting outside. She stood near the entrance of the house, holding a closed umbrella in her hands, her heart pounding. The front gate remained still, but she knew he could appear at any moment. Ethan, Brian's nephew, the reason behind everything. In the days prior, Kate had overheard Brian on the phone, unintentionally catching snippets of his conversation as he finalized the legal custody arrangements. It was official. The boy's maternal grandmother had signed the documents, and Ethan's flight was landing that morning. Brian was going to pick him up alone at the airport, but didn't explain how or when they'd return. He simply mentioned, in a reserved tone, that the boy was arriving. Kate understood that it wasn't a moment for questions, just for preparation. She had gone back inside and helped Martha prepare the downstairs guest room, the only one with a small child's bed, even if it was rarely used. They put on clean sheets, arranged some old toys that had been stored in a box in the basement, and Martha, in an unusual gesture, placed a wooden toy car on the nightstand. It belonged to Dr. Brian when he was a child, she explained briefly. Kate thanked her with a smile. She had also embroidered a small pillow with the boy's name, discreetly stitched in tiny letters, Ethan. And while she waited in the entryway, her stomach in knots, she thought about how everything might change from that moment on. The black car pulled up shortly after 11 a.m. When it stopped in front of the main door, Kate took a deep breath and opened the front door. She saw Brian step out from the passenger seat, and next to him, an elderly woman with a tired expression. Holding her hand was a boy with large eyes and a backpack on his shoulders. Ethan. He looked about 6 years old. Brown hair, fair skin, a gaze somewhere between fear and curiosity. He wore a blue hoodie and red sneakers. When his eyes met Kate's, it felt like time slowed down. Brian approached first. "Kate, this is Ethan." She crouched down to the boy's level. "Hi, Ethan. It's nice to meet you." He didn't answer. He just held his grandmother's hand more tightly. "He's shy," the woman murmured. "He'll need some time." "Of course, as much time as he needs," Kate replied gently. They brought the bags to the room that had already been prepared. The grandmother stayed for about an hour, speaking privately with Brian, while Kate tried to build some kind of connection with the boy. She sat on the floor and began showing him the toys from the box, one by one. Ethan watched everything in silence, his eyes alert, as if testing the environment. When his grandmother said goodbye and left with the driver, the mood in the house shifted. Brian became even quieter than usual, and Ethan retreated further. During the first few days, the boy barely spoke. He avoided contact, ate very little, and slept with the light on. Kate noticed the tension in his eyes. It wasn't just shyness, it was pain. In the absence of words, she offered routine. Every morning, she prepared breakfast with fruit cut into animal shapes. She left children's books scattered around the living room, doodled on the pantry chalkboard, and in the late afternoons, read stories while sitting near the fireplace without ever asking him to join. In the first week, Ethan only watched from a distance. In the second, he started sitting in the same room, still silent. In the third, he pointed to the book she was reading and asked, in a barely audible voice, "Read it again." Kate's eyes welled up, but she smiled. Of course. Brian, who watched everything from a distance, never interfered. He seemed relieved to see the boy opening up, but also lost on how to engage. It was clear the bond between them was fragile. Ethan respected him, but there was a gulf between them. Brian tried to bridge that gap with rules and schedules. Kate did it with presence. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan fell while running in the yard. He scraped his knee and began to cry. Kate rushed over, calmly cleaned the wound, applied ointment, blew on it, made a silly face, and whispered, "You're strong. Just like your uncle, you know that?" Ethan sniffled and asked, still tearful, "He falls too?" Kate laughed. "More than you'd think. But now he's learned how to get up quickly." That night, Ethan asked her to tuck him in, and as she turned off the light, he whispered, "Are you like my mom now?" Kate swallowed hard. Her voice disappeared for a moment. "I'm not your mom, Ethan, but I'll take care of you every day, and I'll never leave without telling you, okay?" He nodded, rolled to his side, and fell asleep. When Kate stepped out of the room, Brian was standing in the hallway. His face was serious, as always, but his eyes looked different. He didn't say anything. He simply watched as she quietly closed the door. Then he said softly, "Thank you." She just nodded. She knew it wasn't just for that night, but for everything. The days that followed felt lighter. Ethan started joining breakfast, laughed at Kate's drawings, and even helped pick flowers in the garden. Brian made efforts to connect with small gestures, offering help with homework, joining meals, sitting on the couch to watch cartoons, even if silently. One evening, while the three were in the living room, Ethan fell asleep in Kate's lap. She gently stroked his hair, and Brian watched. His eyes were softer now, less guarded. He seemed present. "He trusts you," he said suddenly. Kate looked up. "Because I was here. Every time he looked to the side, I was here. That's not easy to find. You just have to be available. Kids can feel who's really there." Brian nodded. After a pause, he murmured, I'm trying." Kate smiled. "I know." That night, while Ethan slept in the room next door, she wrote in her journal, "Maybe family isn't about blood. Maybe it's about who stays, who shows up and remains, even when everything feels temporary." The contract said she was only the wife on paper, but no piece of paper could describe what was forming there. It wasn't a family in the traditional sense. It was a bond slowly built through care, affection, and presence, and sometimes that was more real than any blood tie. The sound of the pencil gliding across the paper was the only thing that could be heard that morning. Kate sat on the side porch, her journal open on her lap. Sunlight filtered through the leaves dancing across the wooden floor. She wrote slowly, choosing her words as if walking across unsteady ground. The past few weeks had been intense. Beautiful, yes, but intense. Ethan had become the center of her days, and Brian was gradually becoming more than just the man from the contract. She knew something inside her had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. The care she felt for that house, for Ethan, for Brian, no longer seemed like part of a signed agreement. It was something more, something that bloomed without permission and grew between the quiet lines of the days they shared. In the kitchen, Martha prepared breakfast with her usual meticulous gestures, but now accompanied by gentle comments, as if the house itself had learned to breathe differently. Kate felt it in everything, in Brian's lighter footsteps going up the stairs, in Ethan's shy smiles when he woke up, in how the house felt less cold, less frozen. Their time together had started to take the shape of a home, even if no one dared to name what was being built. Brian kept his professional routine flawless, but now made a point to join them for dinner whenever possible. Mealtimes had become moments of sharing, even if still wrapped in respectful silences. He listened more, watched more. And when he spoke, he did so with a kind of attentiveness that once had seemed absent. Kate, for her part, adapted with a natural ease that surprised her. The contract still existed. It sat on a shelf, safely stored, clearly worded. But inside her, each clause seemed to lose meaning in light of what she lived day after day. She wasn't just an employee, not just a convenient figure. She was part of something that, though unplanned, was becoming essential. One afternoon, while helping Ethan with his homework, he asked, "Are you going to leave when the contract ends?" Kate paused for a moment and took a deep breath. I don't know yet, Ethan. Why do you ask? Because I like having you here, and Uncle Brian does too. He's happier when you're around. She smiled, trying not to get emotional. I like being here, a lot. Ethan nodded, returning to his notebook with more ease. But his question lingered in Kate's mind, like a quiet premonition. Time was moving on. Just a few months remained until the end of the agreed term, and she still didn't know what came next. One night after Ethan had fallen asleep, Kate went upstairs to the study. She knocked gently on the door. Can I come in? Of course, Brian replied, not looking up from the papers on his desk. She walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a book at random. She flipped through it without much interest, just trying to find a way to start the conversation. Have you thought about what happens after? He looked at her for a moment, then set down his pen. After? After the contract, there are only 3 months left, and... Well, I was wondering if you had any plans. Brian was silent for a few seconds. The legal part is already in motion. Ethan's custody is nearly finalized. The judge gave a favorable ruling. The final hearing is next month. After that, the contract won't be necessary anymore. Kate nodded slightly. I see. But that doesn't mean everything ends there, he added. She looked at him, surprised. It doesn't? I don't quite know what I mean by that yet, but I don't think I could live here again without you, and even less, watch Ethan go through another loss. It was the first time Brian had spoken about his feelings so directly, not out of obligation, but like someone finally facing their own fears. Kate felt her chest tighten, a mix of relief, hope, and confusion. I don't know what I'd do away from here either, she murmured. That night there were no declarations, no promises, but their eyes said everything they didn't yet know how to express. From that point on, the weeks seemed to fly by. The routine remained steady, but was now layered with a new sense of anticipation. Every simple gesture, sharing dishwashing after dinner, watching Ethan's favorite cartoon together on the couch, or walking through the garden at dusk, was accompanied by an unspoken question. Will this continue afterward? Kate began to write with more intensity. Her journal was nearly full. Each page a record of the subtle transformations she was experiencing. And in one of the entries she wrote, I don't know how you build a home. I only know that one day I looked around and realized it was already here. In the smell of tea, in the shared silence, in the laughter of a child who used to barely speak. Maybe I built something without realizing it. One night, while tucking Ethan into bed, he pulled the blanket up to his chin and asked, his eyes already closing, You're my home now, right? Kate leaned in, kissed his forehead and whispered, I am. For as long as you want me to be. When she left the room, she found Brian sitting on the hallway stairs as if waiting for her. He didn't say a word. He simply stood up and walked with her to the kitchen, where they made tea together in silence. And as the water boiled and the scent of cinnamon filled the air, they looked at each other. There was no more formality between them, no more weight from the contract, only presence. And for the first time, Kate felt that maybe she hadn't been the one who didn't belong in that place. Maybe all along she had been exactly what was missing. The sound of light rain trickling down the windows matched the slow rhythm of that Sunday morning. The droplets slid along the glass as if they were trying to sketch, from the outside, what was happening on the inside. Kate stood in front of the mirror, holding a hairbrush in her hands. The suitcase beside her was already half open. A few folded clothes, her tightly closed journal, her aunt's Bible wrapped in a white scarf, each item chosen with care. None of them screamed goodbye, but all of them whispered. It was the last day of the contract. Exactly 1 year since she had climbed those stairs for the first time, accompanied by Martha, with her suitcase in hand and her heart tight with uncertainty, unsure whether she was walking into shelter or into freefall. A year since the unexpected proposal. A year since everything had changed. Kate sighed, trying to contain the mix of anxiety, sadness, and hope swirling inside her. The contract was ending, and with it, the cruel question, what were they now? What would be left afterward? She walked down slowly, the stairs creaking beneath her feet. In the kitchen, Martha was preparing breakfast with the same care as always, but her gaze lingered, as if she knew this was a different kind of day. Ethan was still asleep. Brian hadn't shown up yet. Kate sat at the table and poured herself some tea. The cinnamon aroma wrapped around her with a painful tenderness. Everything there, in the small details, had become a part of her. Nothing felt foreign or temporary anymore. That house was more hers than any place she had ever lived. Shortly after 9, Brian appeared in the hallway. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a restrained expression. His eyes, however, betrayed the fatigue of someone who hadn't slept well either. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. She nodded. She stood up and followed him into the study. The fireplace was lit, warming the room gently. He gestured toward the armchair. She sat. Brian remained standing for a few seconds, as if trying to organize his thoughts. "I reviewed the contract last night. Everything is as agreed. The term ends today. No pending clauses, no violations. You fulfilled everything flawlessly." Kate swallowed hard. It sounded more formal than she expected, but she stayed composed. "I'm glad I lived up to expectations." He walked over to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her. "Here's the agreed amount for completion, plus the receipt for the 6-month extension of your health insurance, a way to stretch out what you built here, even if you're no longer in the house." She took the envelope, but didn't open it. "Thank you." Brian stepped back. The silence between them was filled only by the crackle of the firewood in the fireplace. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. "I thought that when this day came, it would be simple, cold, a formality, but it's not." She looked at him, unsure if she was ready to hear what she'd been waiting for. "Ethan sees you as part of his life. He asks about you on the days you're downtown. He sleeps better when you tell the story, eats better when you serve the plate." Kate closed her eyes for a moment. The boy's words from weeks before returned as a whisper. "You're my home now, right?" "And what about you?" she asked, opening her eyes slowly. "What do you see?" Brian took a while to answer. He walked over to the window and spent a few seconds watching the rain fall. Then he turned. "I see the silence in the house filling with life. I see the scent of tea bringing back good memories. I see a lighter table, calmer nights. And above all, I see you. I see you in every corner, and I don't want this house without you anymore." Kate's heart pounded, racing. Even so, she needed to be sure. "And the contract? Let it go in the drawer or into the fire. It brought me to you. But now I don't want clauses or rules. I just want you here, if you want to stay." She stood slowly, walked over to him, stopped in front of the window. "I don't just want to live here, Brian. I want to belong. I want to be part of this, not just today, but after. Every day." He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "Then stay, but as you, not as a piece of paper, not as a deal. As Kate, the woman who stitched this house back to life." She smiled. And for the first time since they arrived there, they embraced. A firm, warm hug, without words. A hug of someone who stayed, of someone who chose to stay. Later that day, Ethan woke up and ran through the house, looking for Kate. He found them on the porch, still hugging. He stopped, suspicious. "Are you leaving?" Kate knelt down and hugged the boy. "No, sweetheart, we're staying, all of us." Ethan smiled and ran into the garden, where the light rain had already turned into a gentle drizzle. That night, Kate went upstairs, picked up her nearly full journal and wrote the final page. The contract ended, but the story has just begun. There were no solemn promises, no ceremonies, just 3 people, 3 hearts, and a house that now breathes. I'm no longer a guest of chance. I belong. And finally, I am home. She closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay down next to the one she chose to love. Because sometimes love doesn't shout, it simply stays. And that's enough. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.